The old wolf stood up in the middle of the blossom feast and walked out of my hall with her blind eyes open. She did it without hurry. She went between the trestles the way water goes downhill, without touching anyone, and the talk died behind her in a wave, table by table, until 200 wolves of the marches of Anwelt were watching a half-deaf, 17-summer-old she-wolf pick her way toward the light at the hall's end. Her muzzle had gone white years ago. Her ribs showed like the staves of a barrel. She stopped once at the door and put her nose up into the evening as if reading something written on it, and then she went out. Brem had been my father's wolf. She had been old when I was a boy. "She'll go to the trees," said Ord Fenn beside me, and drank. Ord is the largest man in the marches and the least impressed by anything in it. He had a pear blossom stuck in his beard and did not know. "She does it every year," said someone further down. "Every blossom week, regular as the bees." And they laughed. There was nothing cruel in the laugh. It was the sound men make when a thing has gone on so long that it has stopped meaning anything, the way you laugh at an old dog barking at a stone it has barked at for a decade. Somebody said she was going out to look for my father, and somebody else said she wouldn't find him under a tree, and the trestles picked up again and the hall was loud, and a girl came round with the honey cakes. I set my cup down. I had ruled the marches 11 blossoms. I had judged fence lines and bride prices and the theft of a hive. I had stood in the court of rest with my hand on my father's coffin wood and said the responses in a voice that carried to the back. I had eaten at that table every blossom week of my reign and watched that wolf get up and go, and not once, not one single time in 11 years, had I followed her. I do not know what made me stand. Ord looked up, "Sire." "Sit down, Ord, eat your dinner." Outside, the evening was warm as milk. Our orchard runs down the escarpment in terraces, cut into the hill 300 years ago by men who are all under it now, 212 grafted trees standing in their rows on ground that will not grow anything else without persuasion. In Blossom Week, the whole hill smokes white. The scent gets into your clothes and your bread and your sleep. And under everything, under the talk, under the wind, under the thin racket of the birds, there is the bee sound. It is not a hum. It is a pressure, a low patient roar made of 10,000 small engines, and a man raised on this hill stops hearing it before he is 5 years old, the way he stops hearing his own blood. Brem went down the terraces without a stumble. That was the thing I could not get past, standing at the head of the first row with my hand on a branch. She was blind. She had been blind for years. She walked into doorposts in the hall. She had knocked over the same water jar so often that the kitchen had given up on the jar and used a bucket. Out here on a hillside of loose stone and root and irrigation ditch, in the failing light, she went down 4 terraces at a steady old woman's pace and never once put a paw wrong. She was not finding her way. She was walking a way she had walked so many hundreds of times that her body knew it without her. Past the last row the ground turns thin and stony and nobody has ever bothered to plant it. There is grass, and there is the beginning of the scrub that runs down to the boundary wall, and standing alone in it, 20 paces out, there is a wild pear. Every child in Anwelt knows that tree. It is crooked. Its bark is black and scaled like a lizard's hide. It leans downhill as if it were listening to something below it, and it is good for nothing at all. A wild pear makes a stone with a skin on it, hard as a knuckle, and you could not sell a basket of them in any market on the escarpment. The old wolf walked to the foot of it. She turned around twice, the way they do. She lay down with her chin between her paws, facing back up the hill toward my hall, and she waited for the dark. I stood at the edge of the last row, and my heart did something I did not like at all. My own wolf came awake under my ribs and cast about, wanting a direction, wanting an enemy, wanting anything I could give him, and I had nothing to give him but a green hill going gray and a dying animal lying under a useless tree. "She's been doing that since your mother's year," said a voice behind me. I did not turn at once. I have wondered since whether that was luck. Marda Coyle, our right keeper, came down the last row with her skirt gathered in one fist and her boots careful on the stones. A tall, spare woman past 60, keeper of the court of rest, keeper of the words we say over the dead. She had said them over my father. She had said them 7 years before that over my mother. She stopped a little way from me and looked out at the wolf, and her face was perfectly calm. "Since Idane's year," she said. 17 summers, beasts grieve strangely, sire. They fix on a place and they can't be told. 17 summers of it." "Beasts don't count," said Marta. "It's a mercy that they don't." She said it kindly. That is the part I keep returning to. She said it in exactly the voice she has used to me since I was 6 years old, and if you had asked me then whether Marta Coyle had ever told me a lie, I would have laughed at you. We stood there a while. It got dark enough that the wolf was only a paleness in the grass. "Come up," she said. "You'll be missed." "In a moment. They'll want you to speak before the cakes are done." "In a moment, Marta." She did not go. She waited at my shoulder, a stiff, upright old woman on a stony slope in the dark, waiting, saying nothing, until I turned around and went back up the hill. And I remember thinking, in the vague way a man thinks about weather, that it was good of her to come down and sit with my sorrow. It was only long afterward, going back over it, that I understood she had not come down to comfort me at all. She had come down to make certain I went back in. The child asked it 3 days later, in front of 40 people, in the way children do, cheerfully, at the top of her lungs, at exactly the wrong moment. We were bringing the skeps up off the low terrace. It is a job the whole hill turns out for, 40 of us in a line with the straw hives and the smoke, and the bees furious and forgiving in about equal measure, and everybody swearing and nobody meaning it. I had a skep on my shoulder and Ord had too, because he is Ord. Aline Fenn, 6 years old, Ord's smallest, a menace on 2 feet, came pelting down the row with something cupped in both hands, held up in front of her like a jewel. "Why does the wild tree make our pears?" The line kept moving. I stopped. She had a pear in her hands. Small, hard, unripe, green as a beetle's back, no bigger than a walnut. And it had a shoulder to one side, a slight sloped asymmetry at the stem, and I knew that shape the way I know my own thumbnail. It was a hall sweeting. It grows on 9 trees in Anwelt, all of them within a stone's throw of my grandmother's press house at the top of the escarpment, and it grows nowhere else in the world, because the old kings of this hill would not let a scion of it leave, and the men who tried had their hands looked at very closely afterward. It is the sweetest fruit on this hill. It is the reason there is a hill. "Where did you get this?" "Under the tree," said Aline. "Where the old wolf sleeps. There's hundreds, they're horrible, I ate one." Somebody laughed. Ord put his skeps down and came over and took the pear out of her hand and turned it in his big fingers, and I watched him stop laughing. Because a wild pear does not make a hall sweeting. A wild pear makes a wild pear. It will do that for 80 years without instruction. The only way in this world that a wild pear tree bears hall sweetings is if a human being walked out past the last terrace with a knife in her pocket and a length of hall wood wrapped in damp linen inside her coat, and cut the stock, and shaped the scion, and fitted the one to the other, and bound the wound tight, and went away, and came back in a month to see whether the tree had agreed to it. Somebody had grafted that tree. Out where nothing is planted, out past the last row, where nobody goes, where there is no water and no path and no reason. Somebody had done a slow, skilled, patient piece of work under a sky where no living soul would ever praise them for it, and had then said nothing about it at 17 years of harvest suppers. "Sire," said Ord quietly, and he was not a man who ever said anything quietly, "that's a sweeting. I know what it is. On the wild pear." "I know, Ord." Aline looked from her father's face to mine and decided, with a child's excellent judgment, to go and stand somewhere else. I turned the pear over. The bee sound went on and on beneath everything, as it had all my life, and I thought, and I remember the thought arriving whole, as if somebody had put it into my head from outside. A grafted tree is a made thing, and every made thing has a hand behind it. I went down before dawn, with a lantern I did not need, because I did not want to be seen going. The graft was at the height of my chest. 17 years of growth had nearly swallowed it, but you can always read a join if you know to look, and I had been looking at joins since I could walk. A swelling, a puckered ring, a place where two different barks argue for a season and then agree. Above the ring, smooth gray orchard wood. Below it, the black scaled hide of the wild. And the tree was loaded. Loaded, in a way our own trees only manage in a good year, small green fruit crowding every spur, the branches dragged down with it. 17 autumns of that fruit had fallen into the grass and rotted where it fell, and the wasps had had it, and the birds, and nobody had ever come down past the last row to see. I put my hand flat on the trunk. Not to feel anything from it, trees don't answer, whatever the old songs say, but because I needed to hold something. And under my palm I found a second scar. Higher on a limb that branched east, another swelling, another puckered ring, younger than the first. And above that, a third, younger again. And on the western side, lo, a fourth, and it could not have been more than 3 or 4 summers old, because the bark had not finished growing over the wax. Somebody had not grafted this tree once, in one wild night, and forgotten it. Somebody had been coming back. I sat down in the wet grass with the lantern guttering beside me and did not move for a long time. Brem lay a few feet off with her flank going up and down. She did not lift her head at my scent. She had stopped caring about kings some while ago, and I have never in my life been so glad of anything. There is one person in the marches who can graft. I mean, of course, that there are 20 who can shove a scion into a cleft and daub it with clay and lose 2 out of 3 and blame the frost. There is one who takes wood and makes it into other wood, the way a smith makes iron do as it is told. Wren Adley kept the hives and the grafting knife and a 2-roomed house at the top of the escarpment where the wind gets in under the door. She was some years older than me. I had known her the whole of my life, in the way you know a gate-post. She had stood at the back of every harvest supper of my reign with a cup she never finished. And if you had asked me the night before I went up that hill what Wren Adley's voice sounded like, I could not have told you. I could not have told you the color of her eyes. I could have told you she smelled of smoke and green wood, and I would have thought I was being observant. I found her on the high terrace at first light with her bare arm inside a hive. No smoke, no veil. "Don't stand there," she said without turning round. "You're between them and the sun, they mind." I moved. "Adley, sire." She drew her arm out slowly. There were bees on her wrist, a moving bracelet of them, and she looked down at the bees and not at me. "I want to learn to graft," I said. "No, you don't. I have been Alpha King of the Marches for 11 years. My father died when I was 25, and I have not, in all that time, been told no, you don't by any creature that could speak." "Say that again," I said. "I meant it to come out dangerous. It came out interested." Something happened at the corner of her mouth that was almost, and not at all, a smile. "Kings want to have learned," she said. "It's a different thing. Grafting is 4 years of finding out you were wrong, and then a 5th of finding out you were wrong about how you were wrong. Nobody wants that. They want to be a man who can graft." She brushed the bees off her wrist, one at a time with the back of one finger. She did it the way you would smooth a page. "Whose tree is it?" she said. Now, I had not said one word about a tree. I had come up the hill with a lantern's worth of ash on my sleeve and a question in my mouth that I had not asked yet, and she had her arm in a hive with her back to me, and she said, "Whose tree is it?" and did not sound surprised. The bee sound went out of my hearing. That is the only way I can put it. The great low roar that had been under every hour of my life simply stopped, the way a hall goes quiet, and in the silence I stood in the middle of an orchard and smelled cut sapwood, sharp, green, wet. so strong that I turned my head looking for the saw. There was no saw. There was a woman with cracked knuckles and a knife on her belt, standing quite still, waiting to see what I would do. "I'll be here at first light tomorrow," I said. "Bring your own knife," said Wren Adley, "and sharpen it before you come or I'll send you home." She taught me as though I were a boy of 10, with no particular gifts. It is the fairest treatment I have ever had in my life, and I did not enjoy 1 hour of it. That first morning she gave me a bundle of last winter's wood and a whetstone and made me sit on the wall and put an edge on my own knife while she went round the hives. And when she came back she took the knife off me, tested it on the hair of her own forearm, and handed it back without a word, which meant it would do. Then she cut a scion in one stroke, a single, long, mirror-flat face, the wood gleaming wet, and gave it to me to hold, and cut another and gave me that and said, "Now you." I made a hash of it. I made a hash of it 11 times. My cuts stepped, or dished, or ran out at the tip, and each ruined scion went over her shoulder into the grass, and she said nothing at all, which was very much worse than being corrected. Around the 4th I began to be angry, and around the 7th I began to be ashamed of being angry, and around the 9th I stopped being either and simply started watching my own hands as if they belonged to somebody I was employing. On the 12th she reached out and took my wrist and turned it, 3 fingers width, and let go. The blade went through the wood, as if the wood had been waiting for it. "There," she said, in a tone I have thought about a great many times since. Not praise. She said it the way you'd say it if you found a lost thing exactly where you'd said it would be. That was the first morning. I went back the next, and by the end of the week the hall had stopped asking where I went at dawn, and Ord had started making a particular face at me that I chose not to interpret. She talked when she had something to say and not otherwise, which took me 4 days to stop finding rude and the rest of my life to be grateful for. I learned the one thing the whole art is, that under the bark of any living branch there is a green ribbon, 1 hair's breadth thick, and it is the only part of the tree that is properly alive in the way a man is alive. Everything else is plumbing and scaffold. The green ribbon of the scion must be laid against the green ribbon of the stock, must touch and go on touching, through wind and frost and the tree's own swelling, and every other thing you do. The wax, the clay, the raffia, the angle of the cut, exists only to keep those 2 threads pressed together while the tree decides. It doesn't join them, she said. She had my hands in hers, positioning them, and she was not looking at me at all, only at the wood. That's what everyone gets wrong. The tree doesn't join them. It closes over them. That's the whole of healing. It isn't mending, it's covering, over and over, year on year, until the 2 of them can't tell whose blood is whose. And if it doesn't take, then it doesn't take, said Wren. And you did it wrong, and you go back in the spring and you do it again. I learned that she had a way of standing off from a tree with her chin down and her eyes half shut, looking not at the branch that was in front of her, but at the branch that would be in front of her in 4 years, and moving one hand a little in the air as though combing it. I learned that she despised clay and used wax, that she thought the men from over the ridge tied their bindings like drunks, that she had names for all 212 trees and would not tell me any of them. And I learned the knot. Every grafter at the finish ties off the binding, and no 2 do it alike, because your hands are your hands. Old Sarl on the low terrace makes a clumsy double turn like a man tying a boot in the dark. The ridge men finish with a loop that any child could pull loose. Wren Adley tied hers left-handed, snugged the turn twice, and tucked the tail under backward against the lay of it, the wrong way round for any fingers on this hill but hers. Why like that? Because I'm left-handed, and I was taught by a right-handed man, she said. And I couldn't do it his way, so I did it mine, and by the time I could do it his way I didn't want to. I did not think anything of it. I have told myself that for 4 years. I have a strong suspicion I am lying. On the 9th morning it rained, and we sat it out in the press house. It is my grandmother's press house, or was. Stone, Lo, one window, smelling of 100 years of fruit and iron. Wren sat on the trough with her boots up and mended a strap. I stood in the door and watched the rain go down the terraces, and out of nowhere at all I said, "My mother used to hide in here." Wren's hands kept moving on the strap. I had not meant to say it, but I could see it as I said it, Idni Sarn, Luna of the Marches, sitting exactly where Wren was sitting, in a good dress she should not have been wearing in a press house, hiding from a delegation from the ridge who had come to complain about a boundary and had brought a great deal of documentation. I was 9. She had a hand round my wrist so I couldn't run and give her away. "Raven," she'd whispered, "if I have to look at one more map I shall lie down on the floor and be dead." And I had said with all the anxiety of 9 years old, "You can't do that, you're the Luna." And she'd looked at me with enormous seriousness and said, "Watch me," and lain down flat on the press house floor in her good dress on 100 years of Pear scum, with her arms crossed on her chest like a queen on a tomb, and held her breath. I laughed. I could not help it. And they found us because of it, and she got up covered in filth and went out to meet the ridge men with pear pulp in her hair and her chin up, and never once, in the 12 years she had left, apologized to me for making me laugh. I told Wren Adley all of that, standing in the door with my back to her, because it was raining and I was tired, and because she asked nothing. When I stopped, she was quiet for a while. Then she said she was very hard to keep sad. I turned around. "It is a small thing. It is an ordinary sentence. Anyone in the marches might have said it about my mother. Half of them did at the funeral. But it was the tense of it that went through me, not she must have been, not they say she was. Wren Adley said it the way you say a thing you have had cause to find out." She was looking at the strap. "You knew her," I said. "Everybody knew her, sire. It's a small hill." And she got up and went out into the rain to see to the hives, and the conversation was over, and I stood in my grandmother's press house for a long while with the rain coming off the eaves, understanding perfectly well that I had been walked around, and not yet willing to ask myself by whom or why. I went to see Marta Coyle that same evening. I told myself it was duty. It was Blossom Week's end, and there were dues to settle for the Court of Rest, and a king settles them, and it is a job you can do while your mind is somewhere else entirely. The Court of Rest is behind the hall, a walled square of clipped grass with a stone bench and 11 quinces, one for each Luna and king of the last 200 years. It has a high wall on 3 sides and the hall's flank on the 4th. It is a nasty airless place. No wind gets into it. It smells of cut grass and stone and nothing else. My mother's quince is the 8th from the gate, a poor spindly thing, always was. It has never fruited well. Marta was there before me, on her knees, weeding round it. "Sire," she said, and made to rise. "Don't finish." She finished. She weeded her way round my mother's quince with slow, thorough, ruined old hands, and I sat on the stone bench and watched her and asked about the dues, and she answered them all exactly from memory. Then I said, because I was thinking about a wild tree and not paying enough attention, "Marta, why does that quince never fruit?" The trowel stopped. It was nothing, half a heartbeat. It went on again immediately, and Marta Coyle said in her flat, level, right-saying voice, "Quinces sulk, sire. The soil in here is poor. It's all wall shadow. Adley could put a sign in it." "Adley," said Marta Coyle, "has never set foot in the Court of Rest in her life, and please God she never will." And she said it so calmly, and went on weeding, and I looked at the back of her gray head in the dead air of that walled square and felt the first cold finger of it. Not knowledge, nothing so honest, only the animal's certainty that somewhere in the room behind you something is standing very still. On the last morning of the month, at the end of the eastern row, Wren reached up to steady a branch above her head, and her sleeve fell back. Her forearm was a map. Wasp stings, old and healed, the white seams of a knife that had slipped, and low on the inside near the wrist, a silvered burn, wide as a thumbprint, The mark you get when a wax spot goes over onto a hand that is holding a binding shut and will not let go. I looked at that burn and my hands went on cutting, and my mouth went on talking about the weather, and somewhere behind my breastbone, a stone fell all the way down a well. It was her. I said nothing. I finished the row. I thanked her as I had every morning, and I walked down the terraces past the 212 trees and out past the last row into the thin stony grass where nobody plants, and I knelt in the wet at the foot of the wild pear beside a wolf too old to lift her head. I found the binding in the seam of the graft. It had been there 17 years and the tree had almost eaten it. A black thread, rotted, half buried in the puckered ring, no thicker than a hair. It was tied left-handed. The turn was snugged twice. The tail was tucked under, backward, the wrong way round, by fingers that could not do it any other way. I did not go up the hill. That is the first thing, and I want it on the record, because a man telling his own story will always make himself quicker than he was. I knelt in the wet grass with a rotted black thread between my finger and thumb, and I understood everything. And then I sat down with my back against the wild pear and did nothing at all for the length of a day. The wasps had the fallen fruit. There is a particular sound they make, working a rotten pear, a small wet industry, very close to your ear, entirely indifferent to you. I listened to it. Brem lay a yard off with her flank going up and down and her clouded eyes open, and every so often her ear swiveled toward the hall as though she expected somebody to come, and nobody came, and the ear went back. Here is what I had. My mother was Idni Sarn, Luna of the marches of Anwelt, and she died in the summer sickness when I was 18 years old. I was not there. That is the whole of it, and I had never in 17 summers said it aloud to any living creature, not to my father, not to my wife's face before I had a wife, not to a wall in an empty room. There had been trouble in the far pastures. A boundary, grazing rights, the sort of squabble a king sends his son to settle so that the son may learn to sit still while men shout at him about grass. I was 4 days' walk to the north, sleeping in a stone hut and feeling important, when the sickness came up the escarpment. It came fast. It came, they told me afterward, in the way it always comes here from the low terrace upward, and it took the very young and the very old first and then went hunting in the middle. 40 people died in 9 days. My father rode north himself to fetch me, because there was nobody left standing to send, and by the time we came back over the shoulder of the hill it was finished. The shutters of the hall were open, all of them, on a hot, bright morning. I remember that. It was the wrongest thing I had ever seen. Marta Coyle met us at the door. She said my mother had gone easily, at the end. She said the right had been said over her the same night by Marta's own mouth. She said Idni lay in the court of rest, in the 8th place from the gate, and a young quince was already planted on her. She said, "Do not torment yourself, Raven. These things are the way of it." I have believed that for 17 summers. And now there was a wild tree past the last row, grafted the year she died, and grafted again 3 summers later, and again after that, and again 4 years ago, the same hand, the same left-handed knot, coming back and coming back with a scion of the sweetest fruit on this hill inside her coat, out to a place where nothing grows and nobody walks. You do not graft a wild pear 4 times over 17 years to improve it. There is nothing wrong with the tree. You do it because you are tending a place. And a blind old wolf who had loved my mother had walked out to that place at dusk in Blossom Week every year since, and lain down at the foot of it, and every one of us in that hall had laughed and called it a mercy that beasts cannot count. I sat there until the sun came off the hill and the terraces went blue. Then Brem got up. She took a long time about it, in stages, the way very old animals do, and stood swaying with her head down. And I got my hand under her chest and held her until she was steady, because she was too old to be proud, and she let me. And that small warm weight leaning into my palm was very nearly the end of me. I walked her up as far as the last row. She would not come further. She turned and went back to the tree. Then I went up the escarpment in the dark to a two-roomed house where the wind gets in under the door. Wren Adley opened before I knocked. She was dressed. It was past midnight and she was in her working clothes, boots on, the fire built up, a second cup already on the table with nothing in it. She had known since the morning, I think, since she saw where my eyes went when her sleeve fell back, and she had spent the whole day up here waiting for a knock, the way a woman waits for whether she has watched coming across the valley for 17 years. "You'd better sit," she said. "You look ill." "Is my mother under that tree?" She did not sit. She stood at the end of the table with her hands quite still on the wood, and I have never in my life seen anybody so unhurried and so frightened at the same moment. "Yes," she said. The room went on being a room. The fire ticked. Somewhere under the floor a mouse went about its business. "Say it again." "Your mother is buried under the wild pear past the last row," said Wren Adley, "and I put her there, and there was no right said over her, and I have not told a living soul in 17 summers. I found that I had sat down after all. "Tell me the whole of it," I said, "from where it starts. Don't spare me anything, and don't spare yourself either, because I will know." So she told me. It took most of the night. I will set it down as she gave it to me, in her voice as near as I can hold it, because it is hers and not mine, and because I have never been able to improve on a single word of it. She was 19 that summer, and nobody. She had the hives because nobody else on the hill would take the stings. Her mother was dead of a fall. Her father was a man who mended presses and did not mend much else, and he went in the second week of the sickness, and she buried him herself on the low terrace with 3 other men who had no one. And that, she said, was where she learned that a grave is mostly just hard work. The sickness took the low terrace first, then the press houses, then it went up. "You must understand what the hall was like," she said. "There wasn't anybody in it, not the way you're thinking. Your father had gone north for you and taken 4 men. Half the kitchen was dead. The other half was down at the low terrace carrying water. Marta was in the court of rest from dawn to dark every day because they were bringing them to her 4 and 5 at a time, and she was saying the rite over every single one of them properly, every word, and she was not sleeping. Nobody was sleeping. It wasn't a tragedy, sire. It was work. 9 days of work and no time in it to be sad, and everyone half mad from not being sad. She had been sent up to the hall on the 9th day because she was strong and she was clean and she had not caught it. To carry, to fetch, to do what was wanted. What was wanted was to sit with the Luna. There was nobody else, Wren said. You must hear that. It wasn't chosen. 2 of us went up and one of us was a boy of 13 and I sent him back down. It was me because I was standing there. My mother was 3 days into it and past the worst of the fever and into the quiet part, which is not the good part, though the ignorant think it is. She was in the great chamber with the shutters closed, and she was, Wren said, entirely herself. She wouldn't have the bed, Wren said. That was the first thing. She said she'd had enough of that ceiling. She said she'd counted the beams 1,000 times and it was the ceiling of a woman who was giving up, and would I open the shutters? So I opened the shutters and the blossom was 3 weeks off, but the bees were up and she could hear them, and she lay there and listened to the bees and said, "That's better." She asked Wren's name. She asked who her father was. She said she was sorry about him. She asked about the hives, how many skeps, whether the second swarm had settled, whether they had come through the winter, and Wren, 19 years old and terrified, sat on a stool by the window and told the dying Luna of the marches about her bees for the better part of an hour, because it was what was wanted. Then Idni Sarn said, "Take me down to where I can hear them properly." "And she could still walk," said Wren. "That's the thing I need you to believe, because it's the thing that would let them hang me. She walked, sire. On my arm and stopping, and it took most of an afternoon. And twice we sat down on the terrace wall for a long while, and she talked about the trees, she knew them. She knew which was which. She told me your grandmother planted the sweeting the year she was widowed, and that it was the only good-tempered thing she ever did, but she walked down that hill on her own 2 feet, and she chose where she stopped. They went down through the rows in the late afternoon. Nobody saw them. There was nobody to see. Every soul on the escarpment was at the low terrace or in the court of rest. Past the last row, out where the ground goes thin and stony, my mother stopped at the wild pear and put her hand on it and said she would sit down now. Brem was 4 years old that summer. She had followed them the whole way, at a distance, the way a wolf does when it has decided something and is not asking permission. She lay down across my mother's feet and stayed there. She said the wild ones were the only trees on this hill nobody had improved, Wren said. She thought that was funny. She actually laughed at it. She got the laugh out and it hurt her and she did it anyway. She said, 212 trees on this hill have been cut and grafted and made into what somebody else wanted and they're all sweeter for it. And there's this poor devil out here with nobody's opinion in him. And then she said, put me under this one. Wren stopped. I said, go on. I said no. She looked at her hands. I want that said. I told her there was a court of rest and a quince and 11 lunas and it wasn't mine to give her. I said the king would come home and want her where he could find her. I said her son would come home. Her voice did not change at all. And she said, my son will find me anywhere. He is exactly like his grandmother and she never once let a thing go. And then she said the other thing. What other thing? Wren Adley lifted her head and looked at me for a while before she answered, and I understood that she had been carrying this particular sentence for 17 years for the sole purpose of one day handing it to me, and that she had thought about the handing of it a great deal. She said, I have sat in that court at 4 funerals, and it is a nasty, airless little place with a wall on every side, and I have spent 30 years being what everybody wanted, and I would like, at the end, to be somewhere things are growing. The fire ticked. And then she said, Wren Adley, I am asking you and not somebody else because you're the one who's here. And I was 19, and she was dying, and I would have promised her the moon out of the sky. She stayed. That is the part I asked her about most, afterward over years in small pieces, because she would never give it to me whole. It took about an hour. It was full dark by the end, and the stars were out over the escarpment, and the bees were shut in their skeps and quiet. So my mother did not, in fact, get what she went down there for, and Wren had been unable to tell her so. She wasn't frightened, Wren said. I've sat with a good many now, and most of them are at the end for about a minute. She wasn't. She was interested. She kept saying things and then losing them. She said something about your father's shirts. She said your name twice. A pause. The last thing she said it to the wolf. What did she say to the wolf? She said, don't you dare. Wren said Brem howled once, when it was over, once only, a short sound, and never again in 17 years, and then lay down across her again and would not move for a long time. And then Wren Adley, 19 years old, alone, passed the last terrace of a hall with nobody in it, went and fetched a mattock from the press house, and did the thing that had been asked of her. It took till dawn, she said. I did it badly. The ground out there is all stone. She washed. She put the mattock back where she had got it, and she sat under the wild pear with the wolf and watched the sun come up over the terraces, and it was at that hour. She said not before, not during, but sitting in the cold light with her hands opening and closing and her arms shaking, that she understood exactly what she had done. Because there is a law in the marches of Anwelt, and it is older than my house. The Luna of the pack lies in the court of rest. The words are said over her by the right keeper, in the hearing of whoever can stand, and the words are the same words that are said over a cotter's wife on the low terrace, and that sameness is the entire point of them. It is the one thing on this hill that the poor and the crowned share exactly. Every child of Anwelt is taught it before they are taught to plow. And any wolf who lays a luna in the ground without the right has committed what we call the unmade right. The penalty is exile, not death, we are not those people. You are simply put outside the pack. Your name is struck from the hearth roll and the pack is instructed, formally in the hall, to forget it. You go and live somewhere where the trees are somebody else's, and the bees are somebody else's, and nobody remembers you were ever anyone's neighbor. I went straight up, Wren said. That morning, I didn't even sleep. I went up to the court of rest, and Marta was there, and there were 3 of them laid out on the grass waiting for her, and she hadn't washed in 2 days, and I told her. You told her what you'd done. I told her everything, where, why, what the Luna said. I was 19 and I thought that telling the truth was a thing you did and then it was over. She laughed once without any humor at all in it, the driest sound I have ever heard from her. I thought she'd come down with me and say the words over the tree. That's what I went up for. That's all I wanted. Marta Coyle had listened to the whole of it, standing among 3 dead people, and then she had said, "You are mistaken." She said it 4 or 5 times, very calmly. She said the Luna died in her bed last night. I was called at the 3rd hour. I said the rite over her myself, and she was laid in the court of rest before dawn, and I will plant her quince this afternoon. And I said, Marta, I was there, and she said you were nowhere. You were carrying water on the low terrace. And you argued. I shouted at her, said Wren, in the court of rest with 3 bodies on the grass. Yes, I did. And Marta Coyle had waited for her to stop, and then had explained patiently, exhaustedly, without any malice that Wren could find in it then or afterward, what the position was. That 40 people had died in 9 days. That every single one of them had gone into the ground with the same words in the same order, and that this was the only fact standing between the marches and something much worse than a sickness, and it was standing on very thin legs. That if it became known that the Luna of the pack had been carried out past the last row by a bee girl and put in the stony ground with no words at all, and that the right keeper had allowed it, then either the law meant nothing, in which case 40 families had buried their dead by a rule that bent for the crown, or the law meant everything, in which case the bee girl went into exile that same week. Both of those things are unbearable, Marta had said, and so neither of them is going to happen. And then she had said the last thing, the thing that closed it. She said, if you ever tell anybody, the king, his son, a friend, a priest, your own children, I will stand up in the hall and say that you dug the Luna out of the court of rest for spite, and that I found you at it, and that I have been protecting you out of pity ever since. And she said, I am the right keeper of the marches, and you are the bee girl. And she was quite right, sire. That was the whole of the argument, and she wanted standing on her feet in the middle of it. I sat in a 2-roomed house at the top of my own escarpment, and did not trust myself to speak. So I said nothing, said Wren Adley, for 17 summers. You could have told my father. Your father was a good man who was drowning, she said. What would he have done with it? He'd have had to choose between the law and me, and he'd have chosen the law because that is what he was for. And he'd have hated himself, and I'd have gone over the ridge, and your mother would still have been under that tree with nobody minding her. You could have told me. And that, of everything in that long night, was the only time her hands moved. When, she said, when you were 18 and sitting in the court of rest with your hand on a quince that had nothing under it, when you were 25 and burying your father, last Blossom Week at the feast when you were laughing at the old wolf with the rest of them. She stopped herself. She took a breath. I'm sorry. That was unjust. It was not unjust. It was true and unjust. There's a difference. I've had a long time to learn it. She sat down at last, across the table, and put her scarred hands flat on the wood. I'll tell you why I never told you, she said. It isn't nobleness. You'd have had to do something about it. The moment you know, the law's in the room with you, and the law says exile, and you'd have had to either break your own law for a bee girl in front of 200 people or keep it and put me over the ridge. And whichever you did, your mother's grave stops being a place and turns into evidence. Her chin came up. She's under a pear tree, sire. It's a good place. It's the place she chose, and she chose it laughing, and the bees are over it all summer. I was not going to hand that to a court. And the grafts, I said. Ah, said Wren. She looked into the fire. That autumn, she said. I went back down in the autumn when it was quiet and I looked at it, and it was a horrible little tree. Black and scrubby and half its branches dead, and it stood out there in the stones like something nobody had wanted, and I thought, no. No, I'm sorry, no, not for her. So you grafted it. I took a scion off the sweeting your grandmother planted, which is theft, incidentally, and there's a law about that too, so you may as well have it all tonight. Almost the smile again, gone again. I took it because it was the sweetest thing on this hill, and because your mother told me who planted it, sitting on the terrace wall, and I thought if she liked it enough to tell a stranger about it on the last afternoon of her life, then it was the right wood. She turned her hands over on the table. It took, she said, first time. It has never once done that for me since. I've thought about that more than a sensible woman would. And you went back. Every 3 or 4 years. A limb dies, or the shape goes wrong, or I want another. And I go down past the last row when nobody's about, and I put a scion in and I bind it. And I sit for a while with the wolf, because she's always there in Blossom Week. She's always there, sire. And by the 3rd year I stopped thinking that was strange and started thinking it was the only thing on this hill that made any sense. She said, and this is the sentence of hers that I have never once been able to say aloud without stopping in the middle. Somebody had to keep it. There wasn't anybody else. I want to set down what was in that room at that hour, because I have heard the poets on the subject, and the poets are liars. They say the bond comes like lightning. They say a man sees his fated mate across a hall and is struck through the heart and nose, and everything after is only arrangements. Nothing struck me. I sat at a scored table in a house with the wind under the door and looked at a woman past her middle years with gray coming in at the temple, and cracked knuckles and a burn on the inside of her wrist from a wax spot that went over 17 summers ago onto a hand that would not let go of a binding, and there was no lightning anywhere in the marches of Anwelt. It came the other way. It came like a graft. It came as a fitting together so exact that I could not afterward find the join. Somewhere in that night the green ribbon of my life was laid against the green ribbon of hers, 1 hair's breadth of living wood pressed to living wood, and it touched, and it went on touching, and everything that has happened since has only been the tree closing over it, year on year, until I cannot tell you and do not care whose blood is whose. My wolf did nothing dramatic. I have read that they howl. He simply lay down inside me, facing her, the way Brem lay down at the foot of the Pear. And the smell of cut sapwood was in that room, sharp and green, and it had never been an omen, and it had never been a sign, and it was not destiny announcing itself. It was what a woman smells like who has cut green wood every working day of her life. I had been smelling it for a month and calling it a portent, because I am a king, and kings are taught that the world sends them messages. The world had sent me nothing. The world had merely put her in a room with me and let me use my nose. You have not once, I said, asked me what I'm going to do. No. Why not? Wren Adley got up and put another split log on the fire, and stood with her back to me, and answered in the voice of a woman who has already had this conversation with herself several hundred times and lost it every time. Because I know what you're going to do, she said. You're going to do something honest. It's the worst thing about you. She turned round. And when you do it, Marta Coyle will be finished, and I'll be over the ridge inside a month, and there'll be a court and a hearing, and every soul on this hill will spend the rest of my life deciding what I am. Marta Coyle lied over my mother's body. Marta Coyle held this hill together in the worst 9 days it ever had, said Wren, with a lie, and she said the right properly over every single person who's died here since, and I've watched her do it, and she means every word. Both those things are true, sire. You'll want them not to be. They are. I stood up. Sit down, she said. You're going up there now, and you'll take her by the coat, and then it's out and the law's in the room and you can't put it back. You do not give me orders in my own. No, said Wren Adley. I don't. That's exactly what I've been not doing for 17 years, and you've no idea how tiring it is. We looked at each other across a table with 2 cups on it, and nothing in either. Then she said quietly, Raven. Nobody had used my name since my father died. Go home, she said. Sit somewhere until it's light. Don't decide anything in the dark. Nothing decided in the dark has ever been any good. That's not wisdom, that's grafting. You don't cut when the sap's not moving. I walked down the escarpment with the whole hill asleep below me and the sky going the color of skimmed milk over the eastern shoulder. And I sat on the wall outside my own hall and put my head in my hands. I wanted to go and take Marta Coyle by the front of her coat. My wolf wanted it very much, and he wanted it in front of everybody in the hall at the trestles, with the pack watching her face change. But it would not stop there, and I knew it before the sun cleared the ridge. Because if I hauled Marta Coyle in front of the pack, then the unmade right came out with her. And the law is the law, and it does not care that Wren Adley was 19, and keeping a promise made by a woman who is not here to confirm it. There is not a pack on this escarpment that would let its king pardon a crime and keep his mother's grave in the same breath. They would ask why he was so tender toward the woman. And by then, I knew precisely why he was so tender toward the woman. So, I imagine, did every soul in Anwelt who had watched their king carry a grafting knife about for a month like a boy with his first sword. Which meant that anything I gave her, a pardon, an office, a place at my table, my hand, would look like payment. Payment for a silence. Payment for a secret kept 17 years. And the whole of this hill would look at Wren Adley for the rest of her life and see the price of a lie, and she would know they were looking, because she misses nothing, and she would not be able to stand under it. She would go and live somewhere where the trees were somebody else's. And she would be right to go. So I sat on that wall until the light came up over the 212 trees, and I worked out what a man does when he can neither speak nor stay silent. It took me until the birds started. It was very simple in the end. It cost only me. I did not go to Marta Coyle, I sent for her. There is a difference, and she understood it before she was through the door. A king who comes to you in the court of rest is a man with a grievance. A king who has you fetched to the hall at 8 in the morning and is sitting alone in it, with the trestles struck and the shutters open and no one else in the room, is something else. She stood in the middle of my father's floor in her right keeper's gray with her hands folded, and she looked at my face for about the space of a breath, and then she stopped looking at anything. Sit down, Marta. I'll stand, sire. Sit down. She sat. My mother is buried past the last row, I said, under the wild pear where she asked to be. She walked there. Wren Adley put her in the ground alone at 19 years of age because you were up to your elbows in the dead, and there was no one else on this hill to ask. There was no right. Adley came to you at dawn and told you the truth, and you told her she was mistaken, and you told her what you would say about her if she ever opened her mouth, and then you went out and planted a quince on an empty grave and said the words over it. Marta Coyle sat with her hands in her lap. Is any part of that wrong? No, she said. Say the rest of it. She raised her head, and I will give her this until the day I die. She did not weep, and she did not plead, and she did not once say that she had done it for anyone but herself. 40 people, she said, in 9 days. Do you know what a right is for, sire? It isn't for the dead. The dead are past being obliged. It's the one thing on this hill that comes to everybody in the same words in the same order. Ord Fenn's mother had it. The boy who kept the ditches had it. The Luna of the Marches was going to have it, because if she did not, if it got about that the crown went into the stones out past the last row with a bee-girl, and no words while 40 cotters lay under their quinces in a walled square, she stopped. She was breathing badly. Then it is not a right. It's a courtesy that people of no importance are obliged to observe. So you lied. I lied for 9 days and it went on for 17 years, said Marta Coyle. That is how it is done. There is no lie that only lasts 9 days. And Adley. Her hands came apart. I threatened a girl of 19 who had done exactly as she was asked, she said, and had done it well, and had come to me for help, and I frightened her so thoroughly that she has not spoken for the length of her adult life. I have known where your mother was every hour of every day since. I have said the words correctly over 106 people since that morning, and I have not once got a single one of them wrong, because it was all I had left. She looked at the open shutters. I have been waiting for this since you were 18, she said. It is nothing like the relief they tell you it will be. We sat there a while. Get up, I said. Sire, you'll want your book. Blossom Week's end is Sunday. Have the words ready. I brought the whole pack down the hill on Sunday. They came out of the hall in a long murmuring line, 200 wolves of the marches, in their feast clothes, because I had not told them what it was for, and they had assumed a blessing of the trees. Ord Fenn came with his hat in his hand and his brows down. Aline Fenn came with a stick hitting things. Old Sorrow came slowly, on 2 sticks, from the low terrace, having refused a chair. Wren Adley came last, alone in her working clothes, and stood where she has stood at every gathering of my reign, at the back near the edge, with her arms folded. And Marta Coyle came in her gray with her chin up, because she was brave, which was always the trouble with her. We went down through the terraces, 4 abreast where the rose allowed it, and the blossom was going over by then and came off the branches in the wind and got into everyone's hair, and the bee sound went on under the talking, and the talking got quieter with every terrace, because at the 4th they saw where we were headed. Past the last row, out where nobody plants. The wild pear stood in the thin grass with the whole hill behind it. It was loaded with hard green fruit, as it is loaded every year. Brem lay at its foot with her chin on her paws. She did not get up. She lifted her head at 200 people coming and put it down again. I walked out to the tree and turned round and put my back against the trunk, so that they would all be looking at it, and at the graft, and at the old wolf in the grass. My mother lies here, I said. I have made speeches. I have made them at coronations and at funerals and at 3 separate boundary disputes over the same 9 acres. I have never in my life had a silence like the one that came off 200 faces on that hillside. I gave it to them plainly. There is no other way to give a thing like that. She asked to be laid here in the sickness year past the last row, where things are growing, because the court of rest is a walled square with the wind kept out, and she had sat in it at 4 funerals and did not choose to stay there. She walked down this hill on the last afternoon of her life on the arm of a girl of 19. She chose this tree. She died at the foot of it in the dark with my father's wolf across her feet. I put my hand flat on the bark, above the puckered ring where 2 barks had argued and agreed. It was done as she asked. It was done at night. It was done by one person, and no right was said over her. I heard it go through them, back up the terraces, the way the quiet had gone through the hall table by table. That is the unmade right, I said, and the law of the marches for it is exile. Ord Fenn said, Sire. I have not finished, Ord. He shut his mouth. The person who did it, I said, did it because a dying Luna asked her to, and there was no one else on this hill to ask, and every soul who might have stood in her place was on the low terrace carrying water for your families. She went to the right keeper at dawn to confess it and to beg for the words. She was refused, and she was threatened, and she was 19, and she has said nothing for 17 summers. I looked at the tree above me. And in the autumn of that year, I said, she came down here alone with a knife and a scion of my grandmother's sweeting inside her coat, and she grafted this wild tree, because she could not bear that the place should be bare. And she has come back and done it again 4 times in 17 years, when nobody was watching and no one would ever know, and there was nothing on this earth for her in it. I heard my own voice go, and I let it. She has made this useless tree carry the sweetest fruit in Anwelt, over my mother, every autumn since before that child was born, and you have all walked past it, and so have I have known her the whole of my life, and I never once looked at her. Nobody moved. Nobody turned round to find Wren Adley. That was the strangest thing, and I have thought about it since. 200 people, and not one of them turned to look at her. I think they could not. Then I looked at Marta Coyle. She stood in front of them all in her right keeper's gray with her book against her chest, and she had gone the color of her coat, and she was standing perfectly straight, waiting for it. And I understood in that moment that she had been standing exactly like that every dusk of every blossom week for 17 summers, in whatever room she happened to be in, when the old wolf got up from the hearth and walked out of the hall. I could have finished her with 2 sentences. Every person on that hillside could see that I could. Our right keeper, I said, will say the words that were never said, today, here, over my mother in the hearing of every soul in the marches, 17 summers late, and when she has finished there will be no unsaid right anywhere on this hill, and there never will be again while I am king. Marta's mouth opened. And the crime, I said, is mine. The wind came up the terraces and took the last of the blossom off the trees behind them. Somewhere at the back, in a voice like a hand laid on my arm, Wren Adley said my name once. I did not turn round. If I had turned round, I would not have got through it. It is mine, I said, because the unmade right is a crime of the pack, and I am the pack. Because a son who is 4 days' walk to the north when his mother dies leaves the whole weight of her death on whoever happens to be standing nearest, and that is what I did. I was not here. I have never said that aloud in 17 years, and I am saying it now once, and I will not say it again. Wren Adley carried what I should have carried, and she has carried it since, and she has carried it alone. I took my hand off the tree. So, if any wolf of the marches wants an exile for the unmade right, he can have his king, and he can have him this afternoon. The pack may choose another before the light goes. You have enough good men and 1 good woman, and Ord Fenn will tell you which. I will walk over the ridge tonight, and I will not come back, and I will not contest it, and there will be no ill feeling in it anywhere, and my mother will still be under this tree. I looked at them all. Otherwise the matter is closed. Closed today, closed forever. And the first man who says 1 word in the market to shame Wren Adley or 1 word to shame Marta Coyle will answer to me at the fence line, and I will not be reasonable about it. And then there was nothing left to say, and I stood with my back to a wild pear and waited, in front of 200 people, to find out whether I was still the king. It was Ord Fenn who moved. He looked at me for a long moment with the blossom in his beard. Then he looked at the tree. Then Ord Fenn, who has never bowed to me in his life, not at my crowning, not at his own wedding, not once in 11 years, and who once told my father to his face that he was being a fool about a ditch, sat down in the grass. He did not kneel. Ord does not kneel. He sat down heavily and put his hat in his lap, the way a man sits down at a graveside, and he looked up at the branches over him and said nothing at all. His wife sat down beside him. Aline sat in her mother's lap and for once in her life was quiet. And then, row by row, back up the terraces under the trees, 200 people sat down on the ground. I have been crowned. They put my father's iron on my head in the hall with the shutters open and the pack shouting until the roof beams rang, and I remember thinking it was a great deal of noise about a hat. This was the other thing. 200 wolves sitting down in the grass on a hillside without a word, in their feast clothes in the wind, under trees that their grandfathers grafted, because a woman was in the ground there and nobody had ever said so. Marta Coyle knelt. Not to me, she knelt at the foot of the tree and put both hands flat in the grass, and opened her book and did not look at it once, and said the rite of the marches over Idni Sarn, Luna, in a voice that had said it 106 times without an error and broke on the second line and never recovered. She got 3 words wrong. She went back and corrected herself both times, out loud, and no one on that hillside so much as breathed. And she finished it, every word in the right order, the same words that were said over Ord Fenn's mother and the boy who kept the ditches and the girl's father who mended presses. Then she closed the book and stayed on her knees a while. I looked for Wren Adley at the very back. She was standing. She was the only person on that hill still standing, and I think she never noticed, with her arms folded and her chin down and her eyes half shut, in the exact attitude of a woman looking at a branch that is not there yet, seeing the shape this would all be in 4 years. Marta came to me a week later to give up her office. She had it all written out. She had been at it for days by the look of it, and there were places where she had crossed out a word and put in a better one. I let her put it on the table, and I let her stand there, and then I gave it back to her unread. "I don't want it. Sire, I lied over your mother's body." "You did." "I threatened a girl for telling the truth, and I have had the good of it for 17 years, and I have sat at your table." "You have," I said, "and you have said the words over every soul on this hill, correctly, every time for 17 years because it was all you had left. You told me so yourself." I pushed the paper across to her. "Marta, a woman who has spent 17 years frightened of the truth has probably earned the right to spend what's left of her life saying it. Nobody in the marches will ever say those words as carefully as you will. Keep the office." She looked at me with a very great deal of dislike. "That," said Marta Coyle, "is the cruelest thing anyone has ever done to me." "I know," I said. "Blossom Week is over. There's a boy on the low terrace with a broken leg who won't need you and a woman at the Ridgefoot who will, before the month's out." She took her paper. She went out. She kept the office, and she has been an impossible old tyrant about the right in every particular ever since. She has corrected me twice in public on the responses, and she was right both times. She and Wren Adley do not speak much. Once a year at the Blossom Feast, they nod to each other across the hall, and then each goes back to what she was doing. It is not forgiveness. Forgiveness may be a thing that happens between people in songs. In the marches it is 2 hard-working women who have decided, without discussing it, to go on being in the same orchard, and I have come to think that is most of what any of us ever manage. Brem died in the autumn under the tree, on a warm afternoon. She went the way very old animals go. She walked down past the last row at her own pace, out of season in October, when there was no blossom and no feast and no reason at all, and she lay down in the grass among the fallen fruit and did not get up. Wren was there. She had gone down to graft the 4th limb, the eastern one, and she found the old wolf lying in her usual place, and she put the knife down and sat with her, and it took most of the afternoon. She told me afterward, when I asked, that Brem had not seemed distressed, that she had put her muzzle into Wren's hand at the end, which she had never done in 17 years, and that the wasps were working the windfalls very near them the whole time, and that neither of them minded. We buried her in the same ground. Ord and I dug because it was ours to do, and Aline Fenn brought a stone from the low terrace, uninvited, and put it where she thought it should go, and it is still there and nobody has ever moved it. 2 things, then, under one tree. My mother and my father's wolf, and the fruit of my grandmother's sweeting coming down on both of them every autumn. There is nothing I could have built in stone that would have said it better. I did not go to Wren Adley. Not that autumn, not that winter, not in the spring. Everyone on this hill expected it, which was precisely the reason. There was still a dead in the air. The pack had watched their king take a crime on himself for a woman, and every hour that passed while they talked about it was an hour in which the talk had time to set into a shape, and I would not have that shape put on her. He owed her. She kept his mother for 17 years, and look what she got for it. A grave bought a crown. She would have heard it. She hears everything. She is the quietest person on this hill, and there is nothing said on it that does not reach her. So I did the only genuinely useful thing, a powerful man can do with power, which is nothing at all. It was the hardest work of my reign. I ran the marches. I judged a boundary and 2 bride prices and, God help me, another theft of a hive. I went up at dawn to the high terrace exactly as often as a king ought to go and see his hives, which is not often, and I counted, and when I went, I talked about bees and I did not touch her and I did not stay. Ord Fenn asked me twice what I thought I was doing. The first time I told him to mind his trees. The second time was in the press house in the rain, and he stood in the door where I had once told a woman about my mother lying flat on this floor in her good dress, and he said, "She's not getting any younger, sire, and neither are you, and the whole hill knows, and she knows, and the only person on this escarpment being clever about it is you. There's a year to run, Ord." "A year for what?" "Until nothing's owing." And Ord Fenn, who is the least clever man I love, looked at me for a while and then said, "Well, she'll be there. She's always been there," and went back to his skeps. Twice that winter I heard she had said something dry about me at the press house. Once, that the king had ruined more good wood in a month than the frost of the bad year. I was so happy about it that Ord asked whether I was ill. At fruit set, when the blossom was off, and the little hard beads were showing green on every tree in Anwelt, I went up the escarpment in the middle of a working morning. No crown, no wolf at my heel, no hat, even I had left it somewhere, which is the sort of thing that happens to a man in his 40th year going up a hill to ask a question. She was on the high terrace with her arm inside a hive. "You're between them and the sun," she said. I did not move. She drew her arm out slowly, and there were bees on her wrist, that moving bracelet, and she looked at them and not at me. "Wren, sire." "I have waited a year," I said, "so that when I ask you this there is nothing owing between us in either direction. The pack knows everything it will ever know. Nothing has been bought and nothing has been paid. You owe me no silence. I owe you a debt I cannot pay, and I am not going to insult you by trying, because you would see it coming a mile off and you would never forgive me. So I am asking you as a man standing on a hill and not as a king standing in a hall." The bee sound went on, and on beneath everything. "Will you have me?" She did not answer. She began instead to brush the bees off her wrist, one at a time, with the back of one finger, the way you would smooth a page. And she did it very slowly, and slower still, and by the third bee I understood, for once quickly, that Wren Adley was buying herself a moment because her hands were shaking and she did not intend for me to see it. I watched her hands and said nothing, which is the only intelligent thing I have ever done. She got to the last bee. "Ask me a fruit set," she said. "It is fruit set." She looked up at the branch above her, at the hard green beads crowding the spur, and then, at last, and for the first time since I had come up the hill, she looked at me. "So it is," said Wren Adley. "Then come down the hill on Sunday and bring your knife, and sharpen it before you come, or I'll send you home." Here is what she did on Sunday, and it is the only wedding I will ever admit to. She went down past the last row to the wild pear, and she took a scion from it, from the wood that had grown out of the graft she made when she was 19 years old, alone in the dark, keeping a promise for a dying woman she had no earthly reason to love beyond the fact that she had been asked. She cut it in one stroke. She wrapped it in damp linen and put it inside her coat. Then she walked back up the escarpment, through 212 trees, to the top, where the oldest tree in Anwelt stands beside my grandmother's press house. The sweeting, the good-tempered thing. She put the knife into my hand and stood behind my shoulder and said nothing at all. I made the cut. I made it 3 fingers width from where I wanted to make it, and I got it right, and I did not need to be told. You can feel a true cut go through wood the way you feel a true word go out of your mouth. We fitted the green ribbon to the green ribbon, that 1 hair's breadth of living wood, pressed together, which is all there ever is. She bound it. She tied it off left-handed, snugged the turn twice, and tucked the tail under, backward, the wrong way round, the way she has done it since before I could hold a knife. And then she took my hand in both of hers, cracked knuckles, wasp scars, the silver burn on the inside of the wrist, the smell of green wood that was never a portent and never a sign and is only, thank God, what she smells like, and put it flat against the join and held it there. It doesn't join them, said my wife. It closes over them until they can't tell whose blood is whose. It took, of course it took, she made it. That was 4 summers ago. The join has swollen and puckered and gone gray, and unless you knew to look you would walk past it every day of your life, which people do. And every autumn now the oldest tree on this hill puts out, on one crooked branch on its eastern side, a crop of hard little wild pears that not one soul in the marches of Anwelt can eat. We keep them in a wooden bowl in the hall all winter. They are horrible. They are like eating a doorknob. Aline Fenn, who is 10 now and still a menace, dares the small ones to try, and there is a boy on the low terrace who has eaten 4 and is regarded as a hero. Marta Coyle takes one every year in November, without a word to anybody, and I have never asked her what she does with it. And on the evening of the Blossom Feast, when the whole pack goes down past the last row with lanterns to eat under my mother's tree, because that is where the feast is held now. It moved there of itself. Nobody decreed it. One year we simply went down, and the next year everybody went down. I sit on the grass with my back against the trunk and my wife's shoulder against mine, and I listen to 200 people being loud in a place that was silent for 17 summers, and I think about one thing. It is not my mother. She is where she asked to be, and she chose it laughing, and I have made my peace. It is not the wolf, though there is a child's stone in the grass by my boot that no one has ever moved. It is not the crown, and it is not the right, and it is not Marta kneeling in the grass with her hands flat. It is a girl of 19 with a mattock, out past the last terrace in the dark, in a year when 40 people died and nobody was counting, and nobody would ever have known. She could have carried a Luna to a walled square and been thanked for it in front of the whole hill. She kept the promise instead. She told no one. And then she went back every few years for 17 years with a knife and a stolen scion inside her coat so that the place should not be bare. Nobody made her do it. Nobody was watching. That is the whole of what I know about love. I learned it from a grafter, and it took me 17 summers and a blind old wolf to be told.